After the soldiers finished making fun of Jesus, they took off the cape and put his own clothes back on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. About 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you abandoned me? When some of the people standing there heard him say that, they said, he's calling Elijah. One of the men ran at once, took a sponge and soaked it in some vinegar. Then he put it on a stick and offered Jesus a drink. The other said, leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him. Then Jesus loudly cried out again and gave up his life. Suddenly the curtain in the temple was split in two from top to bottom. The earth shook and the rocks were split open. The tombs were opened and the bodies of many holy people who had died came back to life. They came out of the tombs after he had come back to life, and they went into the holy city where they appeared to many people. An army officer and those watching Jesus saw the earthquake and the other things happening. They were terrified and said, certainly this was the Son of God. Followers of the way, followers of Jesus Christ, do not be afraid. I come in peace. I am one of you now. I am a follower of Jesus. I know you looked a little startled. Maybe it's my uniform. Maybe it's the way I'm dressed. Maybe you're not used to seeing a Roman guard in your midst. But I am one of you. Can I tell you my story? Can I tell you how I came to be a follower of Jesus? My name is Darius. I am a centurion, captain of the Roman guard. All my life, I've been dedicated to Caesar. I pledged my allegiance to Caesar. I would follow him. I would do whatever he asked. No task was too big. No task was too small. I, Darius, belonged to Caesar. When Caesar asked me to come to Jerusalem, I gladly came. There might be an uprising, he said, among the Jews. Some of them didn't like being under Roman law. Some of them didn't pledge their allegiance to Caesar as I had. Some of them might cause problems. So gladly I came because Caesar has asked me to come. I came to Jerusalem. I stay in the Tower of Antonio at the side of your temple. And I watch and I listen. I heard of this man called Jesus. I heard that he was a great teacher. I heard that his teachings were like none other. None of the scribes, none of the Pharisees could teach the law as Jesus did. I've heard that he teaches with such authority. Even from the time he was 12, they marveled at the things that he said. I've heard how he healed. I heard the stories. I heard how he made the blind man see. I heard how he made the deaf man hear. I heard how he made the lame to walk. I heard he made the dead to live again. I heard he claimed to be God. I knew nothing of that. I was a Roman. As a Roman, I worshiped Juniper. Juniper was the god of all gods. We had many gods, but Juniper was the chief god. He was who I worshiped. I knew nothing of your God, but I heard that this Jesus claimed to be God. That didn't matter to me. If he claimed to be God, he claimed to be God. I was here under Caesar. I was here to make sure there was no uprising. My first encounter with that man, Jesus, happened out there on the mountain, the Mount of Olives, just a few nights ago. It happened on that mountain in a little garden, a garden owned by a man named Gethsemane. And we were sent to accompany the religious leaders. They were going to arrest Jesus. They thought they might have a problem. He had so many followers. They sent us for protection. They sent us to make the arrest. We marched up that mountain. And there, we already had a signal planned. One of his followers was to give him a kiss. And whoever he kissed, we knew the man. Whoever he kissed, that was the one we were to arrest. So we stood outside in the garden gate and we watched. And all of a sudden, this man goes in and he kisses this man who I now know is Jesus. But he looked different. He didn't look like a man who was going to cause problems. He didn't look like a man who was a troublemaker. He didn't look demon-possessed. He didn't look any of the things. He looked like a man in pain. He looked like a man in agony. It appeared to me that he was sweating, but it was as his sweat was drops of blood. But the signal was given, and I was there to do a job. So when that kiss was given, we rushed in to arrest Jesus, and he did not resist. He didn't put up a fight. One of his disciples would, but he didn't. We asked him, "Are you Jesus of Nazareth?" He said, "I am he." And there was something about the way he said it. All he said was, "I am he." But his voice, it was like the power of his voice, it knocked us back. And many fell to the ground. One of his servants pulled out a sword and began to defend his master. And he swung that sword and he cut off the ear of my servant. My servant's name was Malchus. Malchus' ear came off. Malchus, my faithful servant, is lying there on the ground and he's in pain and he's screaming. And Jesus didn't run. He didn't fight. He told everybody to stop. The sword will do you nothing. And he reached down and he took the severed ear of my servant. And when he held it to the side of his head, Malchus was healed. Malchus could hear. I was amazed. Surely, this man is not a criminal. Surely, this man is not here to cause insurrection. Surely, he is a good man. But I had a job to do. So we arrested him, and the Jewish leaders took him to their court. They first took him to the court of Annas, the former high priest. Then they took him to the court of Caiaphas, the current high priest. The Jewish leaders found him guilty of whatever crime they said, and he would be arrested. And they wanted him sentenced to death. The Jews couldn't kill. They had no authority. You were under Roman law. So they brought him to Pilate. And standing before Pilate, those Jewish leaders stood with this man called Jesus. And Pilate began to ask. He said, "What charges do you bring against him?" The religious leaders looked at one another and they said, "Well, if he wasn't a criminal, we wouldn't have brought him here." I was the centurion for Pilate. I was standing at his side. I heard what they said. Those were not charges. It didn't appear they had anything. So Pilate asked that man, Jesus, said, "Are you the king of the Jews?" To which Jesus replied, "My kingdom doesn't belong to this world. If my kingdom belonged to this world, my followers would fight to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. My kingdom doesn't have its origin on this earth." So Pilate looked at him and said, "So you are a king then?" Jesus said, "You are correct in saying that I am a king. I have been born and have come into this world for this reason, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to me." Pilate scratched his head and said, "What is truth?" Pilate did not believe he was guilty. I know, because I was standing right beside of him. Pilate did not find any fault in that man Jesus, but they had brought him and insisted that he be crucified. The crowd would even cry, "Crucify." Pilate didn't think he needed to die. So Pilate brought out another criminal, a man named Barabbas. Barabbas was a bad man. It took a bunch of us to arrest him. He caused problems wherever he went. He was a liar. He was a thief. He was a troublemaker. And Pilate stood Barabbas and Jesus before the people. And he said, "It is my custom at your feast of the Passover that I will release to you one prisoner. Which do you choose?" I couldn't believe it. The people said, "Give us Barabbas." Barabbas? How could they release Barabbas? Jesus had done nothing wrong from what we could see, but they wanted Barabbas. Pilate had no choice. He would release Barabbas. But Pilate had another thought. I'll take this out of my hands. Because you see, in town that week was Herod. Herod was the tetrarch, kind of like the governor of all of the region. And he would send Jesus to Herod. Let Herod pronounce judgment on him. Let Herod decide. He sent Jesus to Herod. Herod questioned him and found no reason to crucify him. So he sent him back to Pilate. Pilate still did not believe that Jesus was guilty. So he decided he'd try one more thing. He would satisfy the people. He would send Jesus out to be whipped. As the centurion, that was my job. I was trained as the lictor, the Roman who would inflict the punishment. We hauled Jesus out and we tied him to the whipping post. And there, tied with his back bare, I began to administer the stripes. I could still hear them. They started bruising, and then one after one, the flesh would tear from his back. You Jews, you have a rule. No more than 40 licks. So you would only do 39. We have no rule. It was my job and my duty. I was to whip him until his body was not even recognized. And my friend would go and check his pulse and check his respiration. And if there was still any life left in him, I would whip him again until he was near death. I did my job. And I'm sad to say today I did it well. And we brought him back. But before we did, some of my comrades began to make fun of Jesus. They began to beat him with clubs. And they began to declare, if you are a king, if you are the Messiah, if you are a prophet, tell us who is whipping you. They made a crown out of thorns and they placed it on his head. They brought him back to Pilate. And as he stood there, beaten and bloody, almost unrecognizable, Pilate said to the people, "What would you have me to do with him now?" And I couldn't believe it. The crowd cried, "Crucify him." Pilate had no choice. Even though he knew the man was innocent, Pilate took water and washed his hands and told them that he was done with that. And he said those words, "Tie the cross to the slave." Immediately, Jesus was thrown onto the ground, and the crossbar called the patibulum was laid and tied to him. And like any other criminal, he was made to carry that crossbar through the streets of Jerusalem, from Pilate's judgment hall all the way to the place of the skull, where he would be nailed to that cross, and where, like a criminal, he would die. When he got to that place, they took that crossbar and they put a nail in each hand, and they put nails in his feet, and they hung him there to die. Roman crucifixion is the cruelest death known to man. And now, this seemingly innocent man was on a cross to die. In my job, I've seen many die. As centurion of the Roman army, a devotee to Caesar, I stand at the foot of that cross until they completely die. I stood at the foot of that cross and I watched. But he did not die like any other. He did not cry out in pain. He did not beg for mercy. It was almost as if, well, looking back now, it was almost as if he was willing to die. It was almost as if that was what he was there to do. As he hung upon that cross, he did cry out. But the first thing he cried out just nearly blew me away. I had never heard one on a cross gasping for their breath, their body filling full of fluids. I had never heard one say this. He got his breath, and loud enough for those around to hear, he said, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." Jesus was not the only one that was being nailed to a cross that day. Also, there was a thief on his right and a thief on his left. These were bad men. They deserved to die. They were there for a reason, but not Jesus, not the one in the center. One thief began to make fun of him, but the other one, hanging on a cross, defended Jesus. And he asked him, he said, "Lord Jesus, will you have mercy on me?" And that's when I heard Jesus say the second thing. He said, "Today, you will be with me in paradise." As he hung there, he looked down, and one of his disciples was there, along with a lady who I'm assuming was his mother. And he looked down at that disciple, and he said, "Behold your son. Behold your mother." About that time, everything grew dark. From noon until 3 o'clock, it was darkness. And darkness flooded everything. A darkness like I've never seen before. A darkness deeper than the darkness of night. Standing beside that cross, I could hold my hand in front of my face and I couldn't see a thing. But it was this darkness that I heard him say, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It was not long before he would die. I've watched this death many times. I know what was taking place. By this time, all of his body fluids had done settled into his cavities around his heart. It was literally choking his heart and lungs out. His mouth would have been so dry, it would have felt like it was just popcorn or cotton in his mouth. And Jesus said something. He said, I thirst. We had offered him something to numb the pain. We had offered him something earlier that would help take away the horrible death that he would live, but he had denied that. But at this time, somebody came with their drink from their sack. It was vinegar mixed with water. We call it Pascha. And they put it on a sponge and they lifted it to him just enough to wet his lips. And now, I believe that the reason that his lips needed wet was because he had one important announcement to make. Something that had to come from him that he knew everyone needed to hear. And I heard it. Jesus cried, Tetelestai, which means it is finished. The debt was paid in full. Immediately after that announcement, Jesus said, Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit. And he bowed his head and died. I had never seen a man die like that. I had never seen a man go to the cross with such a purpose. And I didn't understand it all. But as he died, I felt the earth shake underneath of my feet. And as they did, I went down to my knees. And I cried, truly, this is the Son of God. You see, my friends, it took Jesus dying on a cross for me to understand that there is a God. And that God loved me so much that he died on a cross for me. So right there, at the foot of his cross, on my knees, knowing that truly this was the Son of God, I devoted my life, no longer to Caesar, but my life to Jesus Christ. And I encourage each of you to examine your devotion. Examine your life. Because I can tell you, he died for you. Thank you for hearing my story and welcoming me today.